technical ability. The idea of the common it wasn't the basis for our strategy. To Glasgow Caledonian 12 years ago, so is strategic leadership. And as part of that, we had Professor Mohamed Yunus, Nobel Peace Laureate, SDG signatory, as our Chancellor from 2012. And as you can imagine, a very difficult act to follow. A brilliant job in persuading Annie Lennox to now take on that role of Chancellor. And Annie Lennox was installed as Chancellor just in July of this year, and that's, of course, be aware, is largely down to her humanitarian work, her work on gender equality, and her focus on disease in the continent. It comes right from the very top. I took up this role 2 years ago and was asked to refresh our research strategy, and it seemed natural to me, therefore, that as the University for the Common Good, the SDGs work for that research strategy. So that's what we've adopted as of February last year, and the first university to do so. The SDGs are perfect for this. They apply to all countries of the world. They propose the greatest set of societal challenges that has ever been placed to universities now are beginning to strategy 30. So how do we frame our research architecture at GCU around the SDGs? Well, we do it at 3 levels. We have 3 societal challenges of inclusive societies and environments, and they really reflect the subject matter of the 3 main schools on this campus here in Glasgow. We then have our staff divided into 1 of 6 associates organised in pairs to address. And of course they're encouraged thematically so as to encourage interdisciplinarity across schools within the university. And that cross-disciplinarity is further improved university research centres. So they have a 5-year term which they would be subject to further review. You can see various issues associated with the SDGs, such as climate justice. It's very much based on originally on the idea of women in Scotland's economy, so ensure gender-based, but has just expanded its remit to the wider area of more generally. So all of these centres address SDGs. Actually, in a recent audit, we could show that we are, through our research strategy, addressing all of the SDGs, and as I say, some centres are addressing much more than just one. So that's our research architecture. Key to this as well. This is just one of our flagship research projects called Common Health. It was actually about developing methods to evidence social enterprise as a public health intervention. It was funded by the Medical Research Social Research Council, a 5-year programme of work from 2014 and finishes in the middle of to show this, to show that if you look at that more forensically than you've got time to do, to show that programme of work is based on partnerships with 34 social enterprises from all over. Partnerships relevant to the SDGs are key to much of the research that we're actually conducting. Universities around Scotland involved in that research project. Our approach to the SDGs, of course, is institution-wide. So it's most explicit at the moment in terms of forming the framework for our research strategy. But actually prior to that, people like Alec had worked to obtain PRIME accreditation, Principles of Responsible Management Education. So in a sense, that's the arm, if you like, for the United Nations Global Compact, which is about trying to engage business more broadly in the sustainable. We also have a Shoka U Changemaker campus status, which is one of only 30 universities around the world to go along with our Prime Global Champion status. And all these are about embedding the curriculum, but also at the same time are opportunities for students to horizons, whether it's at home through mentoring in more deprived parts of the city in terms of raising their going into higher education, whether it's abroad, vision science students trained in South Africa, opportunities out there today, types of help those communities. Other societies and Indian enactors, which is management community, and you have actually, if you like, our staff to apply in areas. We also, funding, as you can see, have set up a whole network of social innovation at GCU World. Some of them are more Southeast Asia. Further builds on our in sharing, nurturing, emanate from communities, but also using that as a basis for some of our, but again, involved locally through Scottish Government. A good example input with our UNICEF in having its recent social enterprise strategy. So all that provides a great framework for relationships internationally going forward in the context of the SDGs. We also have international entities, the GCU Network. So just in the summer we opened our Glasgow, Caledonian, New York College campus institution from outside the United States or outside the state of New York to be given degree awarding powers. Very much on our oriented socially purposeful activities. Out there we're particularly focused on the idea of fair fashion and of course building on our partnership with Mohammed Yunus Social Enterprise. The Grameen Caledonian College of Nursing has now been going for about 8 years and was set up on the back of Eunice's original visit to this campus here in Glasgow to deliver our very first Magnuson lecture, named in honour of Magnus Magnuson, who had also been a previous Chancellor of Glasgow Caledonian University. And his idea was to take our standards, Western standards of nurse education, to locate those in a college in Dhaka that would recruit women from Grameen bank families. So that's the bank that the Eunice's bank that deals with the most deprived people and communities in Bangladesh, and recruiting from that Grameen bank families meant that it would ensure students to this college who came from a background. And it's as much an exercise in female empowerment alone, because it's female in Bangladesh, men don't give the city's pills to people rather than taking a multi-health approach, which is what this whole endeavour is about. Organisation that we have, in a sense, now has a local Bangladeshi principal who took over from Barbara with the red hair, who was the original principal and had gone out from here to establish that college. So that's just a set of some examples of the kind of things that we do in the name of the SDGs. I think the agenda for today is fantastic. I think all of our universities, I think, in Scotland would be very keen to contribute to Scotland's approach as that develops over time. I think what I showed you, particularly using the Common Health example, is that we have a whole set of civil society collaborations, not just nationally as in that case, but internationally, that can be brought to bear on this as it develops. And universities do tend to be here for the long term. The SDGs are here for the long term. Sometimes it's a disadvantage that universities take a long time to produce results of studies, etc. But I think in this particular case, given that we're looking out to 2030, I think it would be a tremendous advantage. And if these events are happening in this locality on an ongoing basis in the future, I think that at least Glasgow Caledonian as a university for the common good would be pleased to continue hosting you as you continue to develop. So thanks for having me, and it's over to Robin and Megan now. We're going to give a UK government perspective, I believe. Yeah, thanks.
So that's a fantastic example of just what a variety of activities in the UK. So I think that was my name is Robin Skerritt-Mund, and I'm joined with my colleague here, Megan. And we're really delighted and honoured to have been invited to the session about the UK process for taking forward the voluntary national review goals for 2019. It's worth international development have a really key role to lead with cross-government colleagues, including with all nations, but also with Cabinet Office and other government departments in UK government. So in terms of the voluntary national review, kind of clear aspiration national review will cover. We do want to make sure it goals. I think that's really second domestic of course we need to show across the 4 nations in the UK. And then finally, it is underpinned by data. It is really very important. We're working closely with the Office of National Statistics, so we can take a really approach to this work. Engagement, we want to be inclusive as possible, and I think which is kind of one of the kick-off fantastic. And it's great to see such a wonderful organisation gone into today. So thank you to all those. A similar event earlier part of this year. I'm in England. It was really good to start understanding what is deliver the SDGs. Everybody has a part to play in delivering one of the voluntary national. Just a story about what organisations and individuals SDGs. So the thing what are universities and really embedding us and a wonderful example. A website about the voluntary national websites, gov.uk goals, and there's more of a process that we're in to kind of keep people regularly. Really welcome you to sort of friendship bases, etc. On there as well, the ability for to submit, they are helpful of the SDGs. There's either a survey response when we're asking for possible by the 16th of May. We want to make this process as we really want to kind of capture what is the breadth of going on. So that is a really great opportunity to on there and to increase broader membership base 16th of November. The process that we're working with our devolved administration colleagues to make sure we've also run goal champions in UK government are making sure we will for each chapter, for each goal there'll be that kind of real sort of getting into the detail of what's happening to help deliver each goal in the UK. But we will also need to highlight to exist and help continue this forward. In terms of before we are trying to make this as front-loaded, the website is out there now, that's up to date, before the 16th of November, which we would really like from yourselves and others. The UN hasn't finalised voluntary national review with a high-level political for next year. And I will talk a little bit more about what involves, so it'll be a bit more about the kind of end. Voluntary national really important moment, but it is a moment on the journey. So we need to kind of make that broader kind of. I do think it's a wonderful opportunity to capture and showcase across the UK. Looking forward to working. And I know there's going to be lots of favour as we national review. So we're trying to do we want to. Thank you very much.
Victoria, next is Victoria.
Thank you. Presentation up. Right, so I'm the head of the performance. My performance framework and we're embedding them in start. I just want to say thank you for hosting us and thank you to doing all the organizing to be here. Some people want to believe, so that kind of vision and the different kind of national outcomes across the need to community, education, culture, and the articulated what that means is that we want to sample the children and young grow up loved, safe, powerful potential. Policy approach, that means what do we make that happen? Where are we spending our money, but you're starting to get us there. Approach. Purpose and the set of values that we're focusing with opportunities for increased well-being and economic growth. Lots of adjectives in there. And the set of values which we believe should inform our behaviour and our conduct and how we treat each other based on kindness, dignity, compassion, that we respect the rule of law, and that we act in an open and transparent way. So that's the kind of vision that was based on an open consultation where people told us that these are the kind of things that they want to see. So, and you can start seeing already kind of connections to how the SDG framework functions as well. We've had the NPF since 2007, so it's been a longer journey, and this is the recent incarnation that I've just described. This is the previous one. People might have come across the laminated version from 2007. And this one was just recently launched by the First Minister in partnership with COSLA in June 2018. Now, I said it was two things. On the one hand, it describes the visions of the kind of Scotland, but on the other hand, it also, similarly to the SDG framework, it gives us a sense of how we're doing, or the, are we there yet question. So underneath, we've got 81 cross-cutting indicators that give us a snapshot of where we are in terms of delivering the outcomes. We've got a website, the National Performance.gov.scot website, which has a data dashboard where you can query some of the data, and you can also break it down based on gender, age, deprivation, etc. So you're getting the national picture, but you can start pulling out the nuance. And important to the national performance framework, similar to the SDGs where it's about leaving no one behind, the NPF is all about reducing inequalities between the outcomes and within the outcomes. So there's lots of echoes there. So what's different this time around? We've been at this for a while. So for one, it's in statute now, which is really important. So the Community Empowerment Scotland Act 2015 places a duty on Scottish ministers to review the outcomes every 5 years. And it also places a duty on public authorities to make sure that the way they run their businesses and the way what they're producing, the way they're delivering services, are actually also delivering the outcomes. Now, the NPF is not a Scottish Government framework, it belongs to the whole of Scotland, so we've already heard a little bit about everybody has a role to play in making those outcomes and that vision a reality. And critically, which is why we're all here today, it embeds the Sustainable Development Goals. So, as I've already said, they're absolute natural allies in the sense that they are trying to address the key challenges for our society and the planet and try to bring about the transformational change that is necessary. So how does that work? So we've got the 17 goals are mapped against each of the 11 national outcomes, and the SDG indicators have been aligned with the NPF indicators have been aligned with the SDG indicators where that was possible and where it was appropriate. So you can see that a little bit more closely here. Sorry, and I'm just counting the camera. So just to pull out a couple of examples, so what that looks like. So you've got the outcome, and you've got a range of indicators underneath that that gives us a sense of where we are in relation to the outcome. But then we also have the mapped Sustainable Development Goals underneath. So for the economy, that maps onto Goal 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 12. And so we're starting to get that spider web in terms of delivering the outcome, gives that contribution to delivering the goals. What's also important to mention, and some of you I know are already involved in that work, is the open government work. So Scotland has been a pioneer subnational member of the Open Government Partnership since 2016. And of course OGP is internationally one of the big drivers in the SDG agenda. And the first National Action Plan in Scotland was really pushing for that connection, that the NPF absolutely made that connection to the SDGs. And the second National Action Plan is currently under development. And as I said, some of you are already involved in that. So in terms of, what does the NPF help, how does the NPF help us? Well, in a variety of ways. One is, I was just having a conversation with Fran there about, we've got 12 years. So that may sound long, but actually it's not long at all in terms of what we need to do to achieve the 2030 goals. So given that the NPF is on a rolling cycle for 5 years, that might help us to break down a little bit what we can do within each cycle, especially if there's a review. We can check in an open and transparent way with the people of Scotland as well. Where are we? Are we calibrating them right? What else do we need to do? And break down the actions in order to get us to 2030. So what does that mean in practice? So a couple of things, and I'll give a couple of examples on them as well. So from a government perspective, one of the things that we need to do, and of course if you ask a government person, you will get process answers, because we do process quite well. Well, we like to do process. We need to align our thinking, and we need to tell our contribution stories so that line of sight is absolutely clear. We need to build capacity, and we need to work in partnership, and I think crucially working on our partnerships as well. So not only do we need to collaborate, but we need to work on the ways in which we collaborate as well. And this is one exercise where that's, I think, is coming out, and that's quite important. And we need to use the evidence to inform action and to evaluate so that we know what we're actually doing works. And is, this is an example from the current draft environment strategy. So, and that's, so these are basically organized in concentric circles. You've got a vision in the middle, which is the one planet prosperity. And then what they've done is, from an environment perspective, we know that environment has a wider set of benefits. So from the 11 national outcomes, we know that the environment can contribute to the economy, to jobs and fair work, to communities, of course to environment, to human rights, to health, and to our international outlook. So we know that actually what we're trying to do in terms of our environment policy, we are contributing to a wider set of benefits and outcomes. And those will then have the connected SDGs associated with them. Now, this is getting a little bit technical, and I know we need to work on language, so I hope people's eyes are not going to glaze over too much, but this is intermediate outcomes. So the outcomes are quite macro. Some of the goals are quite macro, they're big. So how do you translate them down, given the area that you're working so that you can actually have something that's a bit more granular? So in that translation process for environment, they are looking at we are a climate leader and play a full role in limiting global temperatures to well below 2%. We are a zero-waste, resource-efficient nation. So they're breaking it down in a way that shows this is what we are collectively working towards. These are the wider contributions that we're making to the outcomes, and that's how we're making the contribution to the SDGs. Nobody too glazed over? So it's just basically creating that line of sight, okay? We need to find a different word for intermediary outcomes because it's, makes you want to fall asleep. There's another example of the climate change recently, so that looks a little bit more brighter coloured, but it's the exact same logic. And if we have that kind of common language, then we can actually assess what's working, and we can have a common conversation. Critically, the intermediary outcomes were developed between government colleagues, but also with their partners. So they produce those together and are owning them together. They're not Scottish Government outcomes. Okay, one more bit about process. So this is just a reference in terms of that translation process. So how do we get from the outcomes and the goals to action? So we need that intermediary outcomes process is really quite important. How do you make that granular? How do you make it real? Based on the evidence, where are you right now? And then critically using the SDG targets, where do you need to get to? Where are you now based on the evidence? Where do you need to get to? And from that, what are your priorities? And then you create the action plan, you implement, and then we do the whole evaluation so that we can actually say, is this working? Are we on the right track? So that's kind of the flow chart of how we're thinking about how we're getting from the goals to the outcomes to the action and creating that feedback loop. Ambitions that are set out in the SDGs, they're transformational issues, and that requires absolutely transformational change. And that means we need to work on our culture as well as our processes. So our processes need to be aligned, they need to be incentivizing, they need to be rewarding, that we're moving in the right direction. But there's a lot of cultural stuff around, for example, partnerships, trust, etc., collaboration that we need to work on to have an environment that enables this kind of work. So we wanted to say a couple of things about partnerships. So there's definitely something for us, and this is a good environment for this as well, is to do an alliance building between the NPF networks that have been around since 2007 and the SDG networks. There's lots of stuff where we can pull together to really make a force multiplication here. The role of local government is absolutely critical in that as well, and I keep learning more about stuff that's happening in the private sector around the SDGs, and I find it terribly exciting. So there's lots of stuff where we can pull the private sector more in and work closer together. One of the things I was saying is that, and we keep saying everybody has a role in this to play, I think we need to talk a little bit more about what our roles are and start defining those a little bit better. So what are we individually or as organizations best placed to bring to the table? And government has lots of levers, so what can we do? And this is how we are beginning to define what we might do in that space. Like convening spaces for people to come together. Government is quite good at that, opening up space, inviting people for a conversation. Of course, we need to use our levers to deliver the outcomes and set the right conditions for others. But there's also a big responsibility around the data story, developing the indicators so that we know what the baseline tells us and that we're tracking and communicating progress on all of this as well. So it's, I guess, just an invitation as well to have a conversation around what roles might look like. And you might have views on this, that actually there's other stuff that government can do too. This is just one point about working on our partnerships. So not just working in partnership, but on partnerships. So in Scotland, there is this collective leadership programme through Workforce Scotland and its parent body, the Scottish Leaders Forum. And that's just a recognition that some of the stuff that we need to tackle are really crunchy issues. It's not just we all just need to take some action and we'll get there. Some of the stuff's really difficult and hard. So how do we work in the leadership space together to make that traction? And this is a program that looks at deep listening, systems awareness, self-awareness, taking in diversity of perspectives, and critically embracing uncertainty, because some of that is just absolutely present. So it's just some stuff in Scotland that's happening around that. I think that's worth highlighting. Right, so I'm almost done. So this is the "are we there yet" question. So it's important that we keep looking at the data in terms of how we're doing. But one point I really want to make around this, and I think the international experience is really interesting on this, is that the quants are important, the stats are important, and we need to develop some of this. But the qualitative aspect of this is really important as well, in terms of how we're listening to people, how perceptions in communities are changing, so that we're not just getting a sense of, well, you know, the graphs are moving up or down, so we're on the right track, but actually, what are people's experiences in communities in terms of what's changing, and are we really making a difference? So I think in terms of how we're thinking about evidence, we need a much wider set of definitions of what we can take into that story. And we do need to keep evaluating to see what works. So I'm not sure if I'm over. I might be over. No? Did I talk really, 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 really fast? Everybody like, oh my God, what did you say? So I was trying to be as exhaustive as possible. But I can pick any of those.
Great, thanks, Victoria. So the final update by way of introduction is by May East is Chief Executive of Gaia Education. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. I wonder if you have still space for more input. Sorry. Relevant input, but I just wanted to hear at the University for Common Good. My name is May East. I serve as the CEO of Gaia Education, International Education Organization, and also as a fellow of UNITAR. I work with the UN system for over 22 years. So my life has been embedded by this conversation. And I thought about using my 10 minutes, first going backwards so that we can go forward. And the backwards is with a view that it's very difficult for us to try to cut flowers. So what is this of acronyms? So high-level political forum. So I thought about using 3 minutes to go backwards to understand what is this high-level political forum, where we are going to do this huge effort to say how we're doing. And then we do some reflection on what has happened this year in 2018, particularly with the official reports and the shadow reports, and some reflection from where we may want to, some reflection, will correct me, because it's like there is 1,000, whom you would say there's 1,000 ways to new and kiss the earth. There's 1,000 ways to tell the story of high-level political forum. This is one of them. So it was born in 2013, just after the Rio +20. In the Rio +20, it was decided to create a high-level political forum, a platform, with 3 major purposes. One of the purposes was to be in a general way, because it was created in 2012. We didn't have the SDGs at that stage. Also, to enhance the conversation and the integration of the 3 pillars of sustainability, because at that stage, many people associate sustainability with environmental action, didn't bring the social. So in terms of key milestones for 2013, the first session of High-Level Political Forum was in 2013, and was followed by closing down of the Commission for Sustainable Development, which was a commission that had the same role of High-Level Political Forum, but was established in 1992. During the Earth Summit. So from the Earth Summit, 1992 to 2013, the Sustainability Community will meet every year in July under another acronym and another agenda. Here we are. 2013, we have this, but we didn't have an agenda. So the first meeting was an inaugural session. The heads of state saying how important it is to have this platform, but there was nothing to talk about. The 2014, which was the second session, featured many dialogues around MDGs, because it was at the end of the MDGs. So that was like and at that stage we didn't know, are we going to have a development agenda and a sustainability agenda? We didn't know if the 2 agendas were going to merge or not, but it was very much focused on MDGs. 2015, was what we used to call, in 2015, I remember I was there, and we said that session was a placeholder. Everybody was holding the breath because we didn't know what, because the meetings are in July 2016. The agenda was adopted in September, so we have nothing too much to discuss then. So 2016 was the first high-level political forum. 22 countries came and decided to present their VNRs. There was very little shadow reports, which are called the shadow reports, which are the shadow reports that come from, we call civil society, major groups within the UN syntax, combines academic community, business community, NGOs, and we call international, I'll give you the right, intergovernmental organizations. So it's really important that when we go forward in this conversation here, because we have academic organizations, we have private sector, it's not only NGOs when we talk about the shadow reports that comes, because there was not this, oh, government is saying this, but we have a different perspective. So that was 2016. 2017, we then had an incredible number. We doubled. From 22, we had 43 countries. And by that stage, the major groups got an appetite to start creating their version of what they are seeing happening with the implementation of the SDGs in their countries. That them were doing a big narrative. Some of them were doing huge consultations. I have a whole file, I put together a whole file that I'm going to give to Paul of a history of shadow reports, because I think it's important. This is as important as the official reports are the shadow reports, because they tell, the two together tell a much wider picture of what's happening. I wouldn't say that one is more true than the other, but they create a huge picture. And here we have 2018, this year, we were there. We had an exhibition together. We were able to guarantee space for higher education because we work with UNESCO in building capacity for SDGs. So maybe you want to say a few words. How was your feeling about being the high-level political party?
Yeah. It was pretty eye-opening. How many people have been to it before? It's definitely worth it, partly because it's in New York, so that was fabulous, but also just because being in the UN building, it's one of those buildings that you see on the news all the time, so it's very iconic and it feels familiar. So that was all very exciting, but it's the scale of it as an operation, the scale of the UN as an institution and all the subsidiary organisations that fall underneath it, and we're excited by, you know, the sort of national and local level implementation that we have. I mean, I just found it a wonderful experience. I would highly recommend it. And I think it's a great opportunity to showcase what Scotland's doing and what the UK is doing as well. So very positive, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let's just, okay. So, what I wanted to say, I mean, the main point here is that the high-level political forum established before the 2030 agenda was adopted. It was not, therefore, purpose-built for the follow-up and review. It was created, we didn't know what was it was to substitute CSD, and then it was, this is going to happen this year, 2019, after the meeting, there's going to be a review. So the September 2019 session, under the auspices of the General Assembly, we will look retrospectively what has happened over the last 4 years, and prospectively how we're going to fit to purpose, to really to receive the reports, to create a more inclusive conversation, because it's not only the report, it's not the final destination, it's the process is as important than the final task. So, so many people are seeing this 19 an incredible opportunity to make the high-level political forum a better fit for the task of follow-up and review of the 20, saying that you're going to do the 17 goals, you're not going to look at only the goals that they're asking you to revise. because this year is only 5. Every year you have 4 or 5 goals that you need to focus. Always the 17, which is the partnerships, every year. So a government say, no, I'm going to do the 17 because for me it's important. Every report can also influence the way this is going to go forward. So just an insight that I want to share with you. Another insight is that everybody, because for instance, all the shadow reports, not every country has a shadow report. Some countries don't have, and some of them have really acute against the government. And therefore, there is not a placeholder. If you go to the UN official site, you can see all the official ones, but you cannot see the second line of narrative that is important for us to have the big picture. So that's something that also we may be able to influence. The 1018 was amazing. It not only created this conversation that you're already talking here, both Scottish and UK government, and I want to congratulate for you to take everything on board. Whole conversation of the civil society and organizations to create their shadow report, and the delegation, Ireland delegation this year was a delegation of government and many major stakeholders together, so they did very close together. So I have more thoughts, but I think we'll share in our tables. I hope this was useful. Maybe a final thing that there is this whole aspiration, I would say, from governments. There was some insatisfaction from governments and major stakeholders, and there is this hope that I could feel in 2018 that high-level political forum can emerge as a platform with considerable convening power at the heart of what you're calling a global network of networks, drawing from compelling conversation between governments and all the other stakeholders. So,
Victoria, Robin and May to pull up a chair here. And I think the idea is now that having had the input from our guest speakers, the idea now is to, I think very briefly, we started with Robin talking about the UK-wide process. So that's on the UK-wide and national level, with the National Performance Framework. And then May actually showcase, or I think the other thing perhaps we could consider is how do we compare with what others are doing as well. So the floor is open. If you raise your hand, say who you are, and I will just try and distribute the questions. Lewis?
I have a question for Robin specifically first. I actually have got a question for all of you, but I'll just ask one. Robin, I was wondering about the champions for each goal in other departments at UK level, whether or not that's public information, and if they're holding engagement sessions with specific sectors in this process as well.
So we are finalising the list at the moment, but the ambition will be to share it. So make that information available, and then yes, we're hoping that those kind of champions that are coordinating
Will be released, or that decision made?
we'll show it as soon as available. But I would also encourage you to use the BNR website that we've got to keep championing back for information, and also submitting case studies as well, because that'll be a really useful way for us to really kind of understand the breadth of activity going on out there, and then be able to have sort of targeted follow-up conversations as necessary as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Leslie?
Alec,
Who you are, please. And
sorry, I'm Les Hatfield. I lecture on Alec's school module. In a presentation that Kim Bradford-Smith made in the Herald building, there's also into this. I mean, first of all, I'm very pleased that we've got DFID in Scotland, and I go back to the days when that was happening, so I'm very pleased that we got DFID here. But the problem that we do have is that obviously the Scottish Government, from the presentation that Veronica made, showed that in tying the National Performance Framework to the SDGs, if I may say so, not many governments will have done that, so I'm pleased that that's happening. But it does need some resource to make sure that to the extent that that needs to happen, it needs to be resourced.
Yeah.
so is that the question, or is that just a statement, Les?
Anything from me is usually a discussion point.
Yeah.
If it helps, I'll put a question mark at the
Okay.
end.
Could I build on what Les said and ask the question?
We are a new directorate in the Scottish Government, which is called Performance and Outcomes, and like I said, we've our entire team, we're like, what, 7 or 8 people now, who are particularly working just on the NPF and the SDGs, but if your resourcing point is I would expand on that slightly differently in terms of not only how much resource, but actually what's the role of the resource. And one of the ways we're dealing with this is that we see ourselves as enabling. Because if we need to make sure that with, of course, everybody has limited resource at the moment, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. But that the kind of interventions that we're making create the right kind of signal change in the systems and in our processes, but also with our partners that really allow us to build a different kind of ecosystem. So enabling other peoples to take this on in terms of capacity building, how you're doing this, making sure that the data is available, those things are really, really important. And I think that's something that we were asking ourselves as a team. It's a huge remit if you're thinking about it. I mean, it's Scotland-wide change, and that's also why it's important that we're thinking about what can government critically do in this. So I think we're trying to be really intelligent about what it is that we're doing and how we're doing it in terms of what we're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yes, first, second, third. First, second, third. Name first, affiliation.
Go to the top of the queue quick. I'm Janie Andrews from the University of Strathclyde, just round the corner, and one of our approaches, which we're keen to explore with other universities and with the other folk in the room, is we have a vertically integrated project that draws undergraduates into the research community by engagement throughout undergraduate and postgraduate and postdoc career in multidisciplinary, share our experience of this model and also work more effectively with other partners in the community, whether it's business community, NGO community, government and so on, to make them more effective by engaging with others.
Jenny, thank you. So collaboration and sharing. So if you're picking up the theme about resource, I suppose it does lead to the question of co-creation and co-working.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is June Graham. I work for Sustainable Scotland Network. Maybe a slightly more mundane aspect, but in terms of this sort of monitoring assessment, the duty on public sector. So at the moment, a lot of what we involve with public sector is climate change reporting, but sustainability. And we're aware, conscious that there's lots of strands of reporting, and it's kind of placing an increasing burden on the public sector. So again, I don't know if it's a question, but it's just saying, is that on your horizon, looking at how you can start to rationalise and harmonise that better?
We're changing our budget to be more focused on outcomes and we increase the scrutiny, but there's a section of those recommendations that specifically relate to how public bodies are reporting on how they're delivering outcomes, and that there's a much greater line of sight in terms of how they're spending their money in terms of activities to deliver against the outcomes. Now that very quickly then gets you into that territory of, so how are they currently reporting and how can we streamline? So looking at that right now.
No, there was a third one, and 4, and then back to the back.
So, hi, my name is Natalie Glasteri. I work for Scottish Environment Link, which is a network of organisations where I'm members of the NPF Roundtable. I have 2 questions, if I may, on the UK government
Small
side. The one government, the Sustainable Development Goals, but this was a very England-focused process. So I was wondering, even though it's parliamentary, I'm wondering from a government point of view, how are you making sure that we understand what's happening in Scotland, Wales, England, Northern Ireland, and kind of at the UK level? So how do we coordinate those inputs and how are they brought together, and what's the role of the cabinet? It's been very successful. My point is, we've got these outcomes, we've got those indicators that we're working on. How do we make sure that this is then reflected in actual policy and decision-making and budgetary decisions?
Yeah.
So really great to see that the Environment Division and the Climate Division are doing their bit, even though those are draft outcomes for environment, I think.
Yeah.
But what's the way
How?
together?
Question is how.
Do you want to respond first? I've got the difficult question.
Yes.
Straightforward question.
I'm really glad that I think, obviously, it depends on what questions the committee asks us as to kind of what issues are picked up. We have
From a
also,
government point of view, how will we ensure it's a UK-wide process? What's the internal?
so kind of the details of exactly how it will be captured in the kind of final report, but suffice to say, we are working really collaboratively and in close contact with the Devolved Administration counterparts in all of the countries.
Before you move on, are you happy with the response? What would you like to see happen?
For example, because it's and it's not clear to us what would be the appropriate times for us to kind of seek to speak to whom at what level. So if it's the Cabinet Office, for example, that's coordinating kind of the input centrally, if you like, then I think we would want at the UK level to go and speak with them and kind of raise concerns. Obviously, we would be doing that in our individual nations.
But it's an important point, I think, that there will be, this is partly what we're discussing here today, about what our mechanisms will be within Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and we're having that conversation, and
So this is up for discussion.
Yeah, so this is what we're trying to figure out at the moment, to make sure that we're aware of that, and we're trying to make sure that that works as well as it possibly can. But you can give us feedback as we're going along as a...
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. And just on the role of Cabinet Office, Cabinet Office have a role in supporting through the single departmental plan process in UK government. So DFID have kind of overarching kind of responsibility, but we're working very closely with Cabinet Office to make sure it is a holistic cross-government endeavour, and that's kind of picked up through the single departmental plan process. And there's more information on that on the VNR website, and we've included some links to kind of other relevant information that's already out there. Really useful to understand from you about what is the kind of things we should be showcasing in terms of content, because that will help inform those discussions.
Okay, thank you. First, second, third.
Hi, she didn't answer.
Oh, sorry.
The difficult question, did I dodge the difficult question?
Go on.
Well, two words really important: recognisable coherence. And we're not there yet. And we need to get to that space where we have, across our policies, where you can see that line previously, but you can actually start seeing that's popping up across the organisation. And our team particularly is working on making sure that is happening and stimulating the right kind of conversation. So, no, we're not there yet, but we're really working on that to build capacity so that people can actually go through that literally that flow diagram we've just sent out a couple of weeks ago with supporting materials to get people in that space so that they can start, so that when you're going onto the Scottish Government website as well, you can start actually seeing how those things connect.
Mm-hmm.
Recognising that they have both positive and negative impacts on those goals, and I think that's something that we all need to bear in mind, is the negative impacts we all have as well as the positive ones.
Yeah.
Victoria, I thought you mentioned a couple of really interesting words which so resonated with me. One was culture, another one was transformation. To get to where we need to get to by 2030, we need, the opposite of business as usual. We need incredible transformation. We need to plant seeds now. It's going to cost us $5 to $7 trillion a year. We're about $2 trillion a year short globally, I think. And that's going to need to come from the private sector and from financial institutions. So the question that I'm working with is, how do we mobilise that money? How do we get private sector actively involved, the thriving financial community we have here in Scotland really actively engaged, and that's something I'm trying to work on with the Finance Hub together. We have a big conference next week happening around Deliver. Yeah. Not from Robin to...
Small question.
I know. What's the grand plan? The grand plan for everything. I think it's a really, so actually, to some extent, this is what we're also hoping to address with the 5-year cycles with the NPF, so we can actually take this a little bit bite-sized, because you can very quickly get overwhelmed given that the transformational change that is necessary. But it's similar to the answer I had earlier around making sure that we are really intelligent about where we're tweaking the system in a way that really has the most benefits, where you can have, force multipliers, basically, where then the signals in the system start changing and people are having to respond differently and being really smart about that. So that's one sort of almost at the strategic. It's really important that our structures and our systems and processes are aligning, so you can actually see that coherence in for example, the budget or the programme for government on an annual basis as well, so that in terms of what we're doing, you can just see that the guiding star is just present, and is really aligning us into the right direction. I think, so I've worked on cultural change. You have to go sort of round the back to change the culture rather than having sort of direct interventions. But it's something that we're thinking about a lot at the moment. But I find it really hard territory, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Robin? And then May maybe a word as well.
It's a really important question. I wanted to actually signpost to our Secretary of State making a speech on the 9th of October around the role of the private sector in supporting kind of the delivery of our sustainable development goals, where she sort of set out that there's definitely more opportunity in this space. I think is why we need to take a really holistic approach to the voluntary national review and make sure we are really capturing the role that all organisations and institutions, etc., can play in supporting the delivery of the sustainable development goals. So that
the drivers behind this, the need behind this, how they're incorporating that into business planning. There's actually stuff that we as government can absolutely learn from.
Maybe just add something that this discussion of, business as usual, and this was, really impregnated in the UN, the lack of money. And one strand that is emerging in July, and some groups like BMW Foundation and Institute Coca-Cola that I'm connected, looking at blockchain as a new way, how you can, some companies now looking at blockchain, the vertical integration between SDGs, what they're doing in blockchain. So we have, together with UNITAR, we are launching a program how to accelerate SDGs, the conditions to which the culture will respond. So here we are. What are the conditions that we can change for the culture to respond within the business community is one approach, and the other one, things that completely out of the box. So watch this space, blockchain.
Okay, before I go on to the next question, I need to think of the leaders of the future. And I think in that sort of transformational change, and those who are going to take it forward, is the need to plant the seeds here. So I think educational establishments, schools even, it's about getting this into the mainstream, where something that today or 2 years ago was maybe not considered normal to think about becomes normal. And I think in that way, it's not the head-on tackling, but it's processual, it's systemic, and over a period of time, hopefully it will yield results. And a very other brief thing, nobody mentioned voluntary, and that was a UK-wide consultation where 4 pages were written on each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as an outline, and one of them was written by a colleague in this university on no poverty, SDG number 1. And the feedback I got was that the UK government was going to take that into consideration as it developed the voluntary national review, but perhaps that's something we could discuss on the margins. There are a couple of other questions at least.
Hi, I'm Rob. I'm from the International Development Education Scotland and also from Bridge 47, which is a European project about global citizenship education. Thank you so much all of you for your presentations, but I'm directing my question mostly I think at Robin, though some of you might want to take a view on it as well. Really about how you expect those things to get into the VNR. Is it mostly through observing where there's not good progress in the data, or is it through case studies coming from different places? And especially, what sort of space will there be in the VNR for reflecting on the high-level political and how we work changes, the sort of things that Victoria was outlining, to answer whether we think those are fit for purpose in meeting those challenges?
There's a number of elements in there, and I think it'd be good to discuss that more in some of the kind of breakout sessions later on. I think there's it goes back to my point about the VNR as a really important product, but it is also a moment, and it's sort of a statement of direction of travel as well. So I think these partly kind of getting out there and talking to people. So it's not kind of a single source of information. And I do think that kind of direction of travel point is important as we move towards 2030 considerations more generally.
Okay, so something for us as a collective in the breakout groups. Anyone else like to respond to that question? What about in Scotland specifically?
Well, that's something that we coherent as possible. So while there's the UK portal that people can contribute to, we need to have a conversation, I think, amongst us as partners in all of this. What would be the best way for us to collect the data and the stories, and who is critical in this? What type of stories do we want to tell, like, as a collective?
Yes, and there was also this challenge that, what is the rest of UK doing as well, like with Bond and UK SSD and the Scottish